It's been shown through studies that people who consume fiction actually have more empathy, like their empathy centers in their brain light up more. So it's just, I mean, I kind of say it as a joke, we can change the world through story, but it's really true. And that's why I love helping people write better stories, more transformative stories. It's not only to help the authors who will, of course, make more money, have a better business, serve more readers, but it's also to serve the reader and help them to have a more transformative experience.
Welcome to the podcast. I have a guest with me today who is not only an author, she helps people writing their books. She also is a podcaster. So when you have a podcaster on a podcast, we kind of get to nerd out together and share little podcasting jokes and inside things. Welcome to the podcast, Liesel. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me here.
And you shared before we hit record that you are in the process of moving. Ugh. I just say the word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That does kind of sum it up. Yeah.
Right. It's like, I don't know if I like moving that much.
No.
I don't know. I don't know if there's any good parts. Maybe the free pizza. I don't know. What I don't like is you can't find your shoes. I don't know why that is, but one shoe ends up in one box and the other shoe ends up in another box. You're like, how did this happen? But anyways.
Right. I think that's true of a lot of things. And then you're going, okay, I just need to unpack like 5 things so I can work. But no, you have to unpack everything before you can find anything. So
you got to do the whole thing. Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, so good luck on the move, by the way. And I hope everything goes well and nothing gets broken and you can find everything. But yeah, that's great. So thank you for making time today. So, okay. There's so much. I have a list here, a paper full of stuff that we talked about when we met earlier. There's so much to go over. Let's just kind of give people a sense of who you are first. Okay. Let people catch up to our conversation, then we'll kind of go from there. So can you kind of introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Liesel Hill. First, I am a fiction author. I write plenty of novels. I write under 3 pen names for 3 different genres. I've been writing for about 10 years. So been around the block a few times. I'm fully indie. But a few years ago, I also started a second part of my business where I help authors to write better stories and market them a little bit more easily. So I also help authors have courses and things like that.
And like we mentioned, and a podcaster, like just throw that in on top. Yes. Why not, right? It's like the icing on top.
Right.
So tell me, what lights you up about helping authors? Why is that important to you?
Well, I've been obsessed with stories since I was a kid. I was always the bookworm with my nose in a book, from the time I was really, really young. And so then it kind of naturally turned into me writing my own stories. And I didn't entirely understand what stories do for people on a psychological level until I actually started my own business helping authors. And we can actually transform people through stories. It helps them to get more experience, even if they're not living it firsthand. It can really, of course, it creates like this emotional catharsis. It's been shown through studies that people who consume fiction actually have more empathy, like their empathy centers in their brain light up more. So it's just, I mean, I kind of say it as a joke, we can change the world through story, but it's really true. And that's why I love helping people write better stories, more transformative stories. It's not only to help the authors who will, of course, make more money, have a better business, serve more readers, but it's also to serve the reader and help them to have a more transformative experience.
Wow. Like the power of a story, right? Like you think way back before the knowledge was prevalent and people were able to read, the ability to hear a story and be able to apply it was way that a lot of teachings were done, or instruction or how to through stories, right? So people can relate. The power of a story, just in the relatability of it. I love that. That's just And then, but again, I love how you're just talking about it takes you to a different place and unlocks a different part of your brain by being involved in a story. That's fascinating. I love that.
Yeah, I actually did a podcast episode about how to, geared toward authors, how to unlock your reader's subconscious mind, because story really does speak to people on a subconscious level. Of course, it's conscious too, because they're reading the story, but it's one of very few ways that we can tap into the subconscious mind purposely.
So what about like, okay, students who have never written a book or
Mhm.
adults that are on that thought, I'm like, I'd like to write a book someday. What kind of inspiration would you give to somebody who hasn't taken the dive into the pool yet?
Mhm.
How do we get them into the water? What do we do?
I think one of the first things they can do is to start trying to recognize the parts of story. Most people who write are avid readers. You can be also an avid, Netflix watcher or something, but the reading definitely helps more. And just kind of start noticing the different parts of story, especially the parts that really speak to you. There's always going to be some part of it that's just kind of okay. And then the next part you're going, wow, that was amazing. Kind of just becoming aware of things like that. One of the small courses I have just gives people kind of that different parts of any given story, different roles of different archetypes and things like that. And it's just really important to start to recognize those if you want to tell stories as well.
So I have my little floaties on my arms. I'm in the pool. I'm ready to go. How do I become a good swimmer? How do I become a good author? Is it just effort, time, discipline, or is there a way to get better?
So I would say both. I would say probably between 75 and 90% of it is just doing it in the trenches, getting the writing done, knowing you're going to start out not being very good, but you will get better. It's the whole 10,000 hours thing. Mm-hmm. But I do believe that there are ways to become a better storyteller. It's part of what I teach. It's about asking yourself the right questions about your story, about your characters, to really flesh it out and know what you're talking about. So many first-time authors, they are just kind of winging it. And, that's at least part of the process. You're going to probably do that a few times. Most people do. I did. But there are also ways, different processes that you can go through to become, like you say, better at storytelling and sort of shortcut your way to that so that you're not just winging it and slowly learning over 10 years or something. You know what I mean? It has to do with, I am big on outlining. I know there are plenty of people out there who are discovery authors and don't like that, but before those people completely write me off, what I like to say is that actually outlining and what they call pantsing or discovery writing, it's actually the same thing. Of course, it's different outwardly, but in the brain, it's exactly the same thing. It's just about figuring out how to unlock your creative muse and kind of let it flow. And the pantsers do that through typing. They're discovering as they go, whereas outliners do that when they're writing their outline. So it really is the same thing, and you can learn how to go between them. So I do a lot of teaching on that, but again, it's also not, okay, here's the outline, now force your story into this particular outline. It's just more of a checks and balances sort of thing, knowing what kind of stories will automatically connect with human beings. I tend to call it the human template, because we are wired to absorb story in a particular way. And authors should not be turning away from that. They should be embracing it. They should be, I hate to use the word exploiting, that sounds negative, but exploiting that to their advantage so that they can connect with their readers. So that was a big, long ramble, but in short, there are definitely ways by studying craft and studying story that you can become better faster. But of course, you also do have to put in the time and the work and the effort. So it's a good mix of both.
I love listening to an author explain how they approach writing and things that they've learned along the way. The thing I really love about authors as well is when they can explain to me story arc. And what is the key to a good story arc when you're writing a novel, when you're writing your book? How do you craft that complete arc? I'm fascinated because I just see it in pieces. I don't see the big picture. How do you do that?
That's such a wonderful question. I'm so glad you asked it. You said, what's the most important thing? And in a word, it would be transformation. There needs to be change. In terms of how to craft it, I always teach that you must craft from the internal first. Okay. So a minute ago, I mentioned, I don't want to just throw a template at you like the hero's journey and try to force your story into that, because that's crafting it from the outside in. We need to craft from the inside out. That's how you get really cohesive, deeply moving, connecting, emotional kind of stories. So what I teach is to figure out the internal change for the character. And it doesn't really matter what it is. You just got to figure out how they're going to change. And it does need to be very transformative. So I'm not a fan of doing a little change. Like it needs to be like a 180-degree change from beginning to end. And then you can craft the story based on that and kind of craft the plot around that, if you will. Most authors know that their characters need to change a little bit. They know we need dynamic characters. So most of them are probably doing it to an extent, but they're not doing it purposefully. They're not doing it very thoroughly. And they're, like I said, they're kind of doing it backwards, if you will. And that just leaves a lot on the table, which makes for kind of a mediocre story, you know? So yeah, that's kind of what I teach is you start with the internal. That's where you get those questions I was talking about to really figure out what that is. And then you kind of move out from there.
Okay. That's a great answer. I love that. That's wonderful. Okay. So the other thing I love about reading and novels as well is how an author can paint a picture. And you feel like you're in the story. Like you're not just a casual observer trying to figure out what's going on, but they bring you in. The woman stands from her chair and goes to the steps and turns and looks over her shoulder. And you're like, I can see it. I can see it. Right. So how do you develop that? How do you create that ability to paint a picture for your audience as you write?
So that's another thing that just takes a lot of practice. Even if you're an awesome reader and people tell you you're good at writing, most people are not good at that at first. It's something that takes a little bit of practice. But more specifically, everything really comes back to emotion. You hear about this show, don't tell, and you hear about, what's the other one that I was thinking of the other day? And it's not that that's incorrect, but it's not quite what people think it is. We need to always harness everything to an emotion. And what people don't realize is our 5 senses, even the 6th sense, are all based in emotion. So if you say, okay, I'm describing a red shirt, that's not emotional. Well, if you can see something with your eyes and compare it to something that's not red, that actually is emotion based because you're making a judgment. So what I would say is, there's a lot of answers to this question. It's not just one simple, straightforward thing, but always make sure that you're harnessing whatever you're describing to an emotion or to one of your 5 senses, if that's a little bit easier to think of. Again, what I always tell my critique group, I have a bunch of authors that we critique each other's stuff. And when they're being too vague, I just say, help us visualize it. You know, if all you're saying is she raised her arm, tell me how she's raising her arm, how high, what's she doing with it, help us see it. But of course, you can also help us smell it, help us taste it. There are the other senses too. There's also something called passive voice that's really tricky. Most people, when they first start out, use passive voice all over the place. It's totally normal, but you have to kind of learn to edit for that because that takes the reader out of the story. It's like having an extra step between them in the story. And it's hard to describe this way if people don't know what passive voice is, but it's just a way of taking out filler words so that the sentence is very strong and very concrete. And most of us overwrite when we start. So that's another thing that takes authors. It tends to take them years. But I have several books and courses on that for how to specifically edit for passive voice, which always makes your manuscript a lot stronger. You can tell a big difference between something that has passive voice in it and something that doesn't.
Okay. Can you give me just a brief example of a passive voice?
Yeah. Let's see. So if you were to say, she decided that she would be singing the song that morning, the be singing, the ing kind of after the verb is a big red flag for it. So you would change it to something just like she decided she would sing. You're just simplifying the sentence, taking out extra words. And I have a little novella that people can get on Amazon that shows, it's called Editing for Passive Voice, but I just have a list of what I call crutch words in there. And pretty much any sentence that has that word or phrase in it is passive voice. So sometimes you can just look for that, for the red flags, because if you're just reading the sentence, it's not necessarily going to jump out at you just as you're going through it, So you kind of have to be very logical and very purposeful in searching for those.
So do you recommend that you are aware of that as you write, or are you saying to come back in the edit mode and look for those and address them then?
For most people, it'll be easier to edit for them afterward, because especially when they're starting out, that might interrupt their flow of writing, and then it's going to take longer, be harder to get back in. Plus, like I said, you can find them a lot better. Like literally what I did for a long time was just use the find search in Word
Yep.
And go through and find all of them and fix them, and then you can read through it one more time for continuity, see where you messed up a sentence or whatever. But that was much easier than just reading through my book and looking for them, because you get caught up in a million other things in your story and your brain's just going to go right over them. You're not going to see them. However, I will say that once you start doing that and doing that regularly, you will naturally leave out the passive voice more often when you're writing, because you're just training your brain around
more
it.
More aware of it, more conscious of it. Yeah. Great. So, okay. So much information already. I'm going to have to listen back to this again. So tell me a little bit about writing under pen names. What freedom does that give you as an author to be able to write under a different name? Does that create space for you as an author?
Yeah, that's such a great way to word it. Most people, when they ask about pen names, say, why is it hard to do that?
Yeah.
But I love that. It really does. It is a little bit more work in some ways to do multiple pen names, but at the same time, you can be whoever you want under a pen name. You can write a totally different genre. You can, you have authors that only, and this is more me, I did it originally mostly for marketing. Because Amazon, it'll mess up the algorithm a little bit if you have multiple genres under one pen name. So that's the reason I started it. But I've even heard of authors who will do a different pen name and not give it to their list. They just want to be a completely different author and, grow a new organic audience that way. So yeah, it does. It gives you the ability to start over anytime you want and do whatever you want with it. So, of course, there's probably some negatives to that, but yeah, I think freeing is a good word. You can, anytime you want to start a new endeavor, I mean, in the digital world we live in, we can do that anytime we want. And even 10, 15 years ago, that was not possible for an author to do.
It might be a little hard to do an autograph signing.
Right.
When they're like, hey, aren't you? Yeah, I'm also them. But you're right. And I like the idea of space. I love the idea of, like you're mentioning about Amazon and not throwing off how your listings and all that works on Amazon, and the fact that you can write a recipe book and then you can go write a novel, and there are two different things, and you can create some space. That's great. It's really good. I'm curious about your connection. You've built it for yourself, but your connection between writing and podcasting. Why is that an interesting bridge as authors to either be on a podcast like we're doing today, or have a podcast or be a part of that community? Why is there a benefit, or what is the benefit between writing and podcasting?
Well, as the world changes and the internet changes, things are becoming more about video and audio than just about writing. So I think it's people most definitely are listening to stories. Audiobooks are big. People are starting to put things like that on not only podcasts, but on YouTube even. So I think that it's maybe less about the craft of fiction and more about the community, listening to other people. I know that people who listen to my podcast, some of the authors I've had on there have had a ton of success, and some of them are just starting to hit their success. So I always say, these are authors who are in the trenches every day, doing the writing, pushing forward, growing their email list, and it's always helpful to know that you're not alone in that there's other people doing this. You can, of course, learn from them and do what they're doing, but also, you hear what their challenges are. And even if you haven't had that exact challenge, you're just in good company, and you know that everybody's got challenges and everybody's moving forward. And, I think it gives people hope and community. And yeah, just, it's kind of like going to writing conferences, which I haven't been to a writing conference since, early 2020. Yeah. But I always love doing that, because you're just kind of brushing shoulders with all these other creatives who are in the room, and you're all trying to accomplish the same thing. And there's just this camaraderie that's really lovely. And you can kind of feel the vibe of it. That's why people love going to those kinds of conferences. And you kind of get a little bit of that through podcasting, through, any kind of thing on the internet where you're seeing and feeling and meeting other authors who are all kind of on the same mission, but also in their own individual way.
So you've already touched on community, which I love. Tell me a little bit more about community in the author space. You create community with what you do, helping authors. You have community through your podcast. How does an author connect with or find a good community that they can do authorship with? How does that happen?
Yeah, we have such a great online community. I always love the author community because, they tend to be very, very supportive of one another and very positive about things. And of course, you're always going to get a few negative ones, but most of them by far have kind of learned that, the rising tide lifts all boats. So they're very, very supportive of each other and very kind and very giving of their time. In terms of finding someone or some community to be helpful, Facebook is a great place. There's literally hundreds, probably thousands of author communities on there for different genres, for different things. You might have one about storycraft and one about ads and one about something totally different. Podcasting is another way. I actually encourage, people that I teach to listen to podcasts, because there are people who really keep their thumb on the pulse of what's going on in the author world, and how, Audible is changing this week, or how there's this case in Canada that's going to change things moving forward. And, most of us don't have time to go dig up that information. Yeah. So it just gives us a good idea of what's going on. So social media is actually a really good one. A lot of the more local stuff was shut down with COVID, and I don't know how much of it has come back up because I just really haven't been paying attention. But usually there's some sort of local writing club of some kind. Most places have those pretty close by. So you could also get online and just look for author or writing organizations near me, that sort of thing. Because before I was online, that's what I did. I'm in Utah. We have the League of Utah Writers. That was one of the first places that I found community, and back then they were face-to-face meetings. We would just kind of get together and do things. And I think honestly, the answer is just search, because I think it's everywhere. You just got to go out and look for it, and then you'll find something that'll work for you.
So the one thing I've been listening to other podcasts and interviews with authors, and a question came up on a different podcast, was the author was asking whether or not they should support their books and their writings under their own personal social media handles, or should they create a separate handle for their promotion of their book or what they're working on? Should they keep them separate? I guess it's kind of up to you, really. But do you have any advice either way? What would be a good way to do that?
I think most people would tell you to create a separate one so that it's more of a business entity. I think you can do it on your personal one, but it also depends on what else you're using your personal profile for. Okay.
Yeah, that makes
sense.
If
you're using your personal profile for personal things, I wouldn't combine that with your business, because you're going to end up getting readers commenting on that time you went to the lake with your kid, or something like that. And you just want to kind of be careful from a legal standpoint, so it's kind of actually the same thing with pen names. I could keep all of my different genres under one pen name if I really wanted to. But from a legal standpoint, from a business standpoint, it's actually better to keep them separate. So you're right that they can do either one, but I would just say it kind of depends on what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay. So you talked about listening to people with their thumb on the pulse of what's going on. You are obviously that person. Tell me a little bit about what's interesting to you right now. What's captured your interest from a writing perspective for authors? What are you kind of, I guess you could say, nerding out on right now? What's exciting for you right now?
Oh, wow. There's kind of a lot of things. For one thing, I've kind of been, and they haven't had anything really recent, but I've been following the whole Barnes and Noble thing. It's kind of changed hands a few times, and people have talked about what the buyers are going to do with it. I'm just really interested to see what's going to happen with that company, because so many of the others, like in the past, Borders and things like that, have gone out of business. And I hope Barnes and Noble doesn't. I grew up reading books in Barnes and Noble and perusing their shelves. So I've just kind of been following it. And right now I think a hedge fund bought it. And so everyone's just kind of like, it's up in the air and nobody knows what's going to happen with that. So especially because I'm a business owner, I'm interested in kind of the business side of it, nerding out about it a little, but I'm just really interested to see kind of what happens with that, and whatever does, it'll kind of show in general what way the industry is going, I think. So that's interesting. I have been looking into Kindle Vellum a little bit lately. I have, because I've been building my business, I have kept writing while building another side of my business. Because of that, I have like 2.5 books that are written and just need to be edited and published. And I just haven't done the publishing aspect of them yet. So I was thinking about maybe putting them on Kindle Vella just as an experiment, because I've never done it before. So I've been talking to authors who've done that. And the thing about Kindle Vella right now is that it's not, there are not very strict rules around it. So you know how Amazon is famously very strict about KU and exclusivity. They don't have anything like that for Kindle Vella right now. I mean, they have a few things, like it has to be on there for 30 days before you put it anywhere wide, but it's really very open right now. So I was going, that could easily change in the future. And I kind of want to dig in and see what's going on with that. So anyway, those are a couple of things. I'm always looking at lots of different things, but there's always something changing in our industry that you can kind of watch and keep an eye on.
And those early adoptions of whatever's coming, if you can be there and catch the wave, it might help you grow your business or learn a new skill or add something to your portfolio that you wouldn't have known about. And again, that goes back to community, and it's going to be hard to find all that information on your own. So through podcasting, through connecting with in a community setting, that's where you're going to learn about these things. So big encouragement to, as an author, to plug in and get out of the cabin in the woods and go and meet with people and build your community. That's probably really important.
Yeah.
Let's share a little bit about your writings. Like what is the most recent thing that's out for you personally that you can share and talk about so that people can find a book and pick up a book from you?
Oh, thank you. So I have, like I said, I write 3 different genres, and I actually have, technically I usually count it as 4, even though 2 of them would fall under sci-fi and fantasy. One's sci-fi and one's fantasy. So those are technically different genres. Anyway, I'm currently working on a series called Dragon Magic that is a dragon fantasy, medieval high fantasy. And all I have out right now for that is a short story prequel that's called The Hatching. And that one's the one I've been working on, and then I need to get the first couple of books published, and I have people waiting for it and bugging me about it. But it was a really fun one because I wrote this short story for a short story competition. It's just like a 7,000 word story, and I'm somebody who really loved high fantasy as I was growing up. I read it constantly, but I didn't write it right away because I had it up on this pedestal and I knew I didn't quite have the chops to do a really good job that I wanted to. So I finally kind of gotten around to writing it the last few years, and it's really, really fun. But anyway, the short story, I think it got an honorable mention. It didn't win anything or anything like that, but I had a lot of people coming up to me and going, "Are you going to expand this into a series? Because you could, and we like that." And I was going, "Oh. That was totally my plan the whole time."
Yeah. I love it.
So anyway, so that will be coming out soon. And actually that's one of them I'm thinking about putting on Kindle Vella. If you're more of a crime mystery kind of person, I actually have the most books out in that genre. And I do have a free novella that can get you into the series called Lost Diamond Girls, which you can find on any platform. So that's a good one. Okay. And then I also write historical. Specifically, I have Russian historical, which is a little bit different. And I do have a free novella for that too, called Turrets of Turbulence, which you can find wide. So I always encourage people to get the free one first. That way you can decide if my writing is for you or not. And if not, then, you haven't spent any money. And if you have, then there's plenty more books to buy.
Wow. So is that something that you promote with your authors to do exactly what you just did, to give something out like that, to get people in?
Yes. And a lot of authors do that. They call them lead magnets, free lead magnets. You can do a full book, you can do a short story, you can do a novella. More and more longer ones are working better than short stories. But there are even whole websites that are devoted to that, like BookFunnel or Story Origin, where they can put their free lead magnet up there and get readers to join their email list that way. In other words, like they give you their email and join the list in exchange for the free lead magnet. Mm-hmm. So I do that. I also do keep them on the platform. So you can also just get it on Amazon if you want. Without joining the list. And there's authors that say not to do that you should have one exclusively for your list and exclusively on Amazon. I don't think they're wrong, but for me, it hasn't mattered that much because I do think they're two different audiences. Some people will never join your list and some people will always join your list. And so you might as well, and maybe I'll do an exclusive one eventually. It's also a time issue, of writing something new. So
one author I was talking to recently as well, she said that she had like extra content above in her book, like an extra chapter that didn't make the book, or like further thoughts, like kind of like an extension of what she had written. And she used that in her social media as a way to connect with people and to kind of build that bridge and bring people in as well. So there's other things I guess you can leverage as an author.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And then being on the Prolific Author podcast, that is one great way to get out there and share your story. But what other ways can we do as authors to maintain community and build that up? What do you suggest?
Just collaboration is a good one. Lots of people get together and, of course there's writing together, which is for some people and not for others. But then there's also things like anthologies, doing promotions together. You can get together with people who write the same genre and sort of cross-pollinate each other's audiences that way, be introduced to new people. Because this is the great thing about being in the fiction space. There's nobody who reads one author, so we don't really have to compete with each other. If anything, the readers who we most want to be targeting, the people who read constantly, voraciously, 10 books a week, we can't keep up. I can't write enough to satiate them all the time. Yeah. So it's good to support each other. And, it helps. For every other author that I support, they'll turn around and support me. And so that just helps all of us do better in our businesses,
The rising tide comes again.
Right.
What is it like to work with you? What is it for people when they sign up? How does it look? What does it feel like when you're on the other side of the camera and we're talking? What does it look like?
Well, I hope it's enlightening. Yeah. No, usually what I do is I do have courses that are video courses, but I also do coaching. And so what that kind of looks like is, again, me asking you questions about your story. So if we're doing the thing where I'm helping you to get your story written, I'm going to ask you questions. I'm going to give you time to write it out and think about it, so kind of like little homework assignments. But most people don't realize that, like, they'll say to themselves or to me, I know what my story is about. It's about this. I'm writing a story about a serial killer and the cop that catches him. And that's what my story is about. But if you can sit down and actually write, like a journal almost, what your story is about, what your point is, what your theme is, it gives people so much clarity on their story. And most authors don't do that. So that's a lot of what I facilitate. It's not me telling you how to write your story or, heaven forbid, telling you what to write in your story. It's helping you unlock that story because it's in your subconscious mind, but it hasn't necessarily been brought completely into your conscious mind. And once you can get it there, then you have so much more cohesion in your story. You have so much more authority on what that story is about and how to bring it across to the reader. So that's a lot of what I do. Wow.
Okay. So people listening are like, okay, that's exactly what I need. What do I do? How do I get in touch with this person? I need their help. Tell me.
Well, if you're interested, you can always email me at lkhillbooks@gmail.com. But you can also listen to my podcast, of course, and I do have a free PDF. You can get it at bit.ly/10plot. And it's 10 plot points that all good stories have, just to kind of start recognizing those.
Nice.
So that would get you on my list, and then you would hear from me. I do have a boot camp coming up at the end of August that you can sign up for. And it's about that. It's called Finding the Heart of Your Story Boot Camp and how to do that. It's going to be a free boot camp, just like a 3 or 4 day training sort of thing. So if you want to sign up for that, let's see if I actually have I don't have it in front of me, but I will send it to you if you want to
put it in the show notes for sure. Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. Okay. Before we end off, we're almost done our time here, and I know you have lots of packing and moving to do. So what's your message to authors? What would you like to leave off with? How can we encourage them to keep going?
I believe that everyone in the entire world has at least one book in them of some kind. And even if I gave 100 authors a story prompt and even gave them character names and basic events that happened in that story, not a single one of those authors would write the same story. Okay. So you have a story in you that only you can write. And the reason you are even here listening to this podcast is because you feel called to write it. So I'm not going to say it's going to be easy. I'm not going to say that you're not going to have stumbling blocks and headaches and brain cramps sometimes, but it's going to be worth it. And the first time as you said before, the first time you get that message from someone who said, that was amazing, that story changed my life, I mean, it's an addiction. You'll never go back. So just keep on keeping on. And as long as you're open-minded and willing to keep learning and willing to keep trying and make mistakes and push through them, you actually can't fail. You'll figure it out eventually.
Wow. There you go. So if you have any questions about your writing future, this is the person to talk to. Thank you so much for making time for us. Again, like, you're busy, you got lots going on, but to have time for us, thank you for being part of the podcast today. I'm really happy to have you on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. You saved me from an hour of packing so I could do something I'm really passionate about, which is share this message.
And if you want more, go right now. You've listened to this podcast, go to the Prolific Author Podcast, jump over there, hit play, hit subscribe, follow, do all the stuff, and make sure you support as well the Prolific Author Podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey guys, thank you for listening to the podcast. Jump over to livingthenextchapter.com, our website, and you will see a spot where you can leave a voice message. We'd love to hear your feedback. We're trying to make it as easy as possible to hear from you. So if you want your voice on this podcast, yes, that's possible. Go to livingthenextchapter.com, click the little microphone icon, leave a voice message. We'll insert your message into the podcast. Tell us where you're listening from. Tell us your favorite guest. Maybe there's a guest we should have on the podcast. Maybe you should be our next guest. Leave us a message. livingthenextchapter.com. Again, thank you so much for listening. Please share this podcast episode with one person. That's all we're asking. Meet you over there at livingthenextchapter.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. Love to hear from you. Till the next episode. It's coming up right away. Be sure you hit that subscribe button. Thank you for being part of Living the Next Chapter. Thank you for supporting our guests. Have a great day.
Mindshift Power Podcast, the podcast for teenagers and those who work with them. There's a huge problem in America today. There's a very large disconnect between teenagers and the adults who work with them. I'm looking to bridge that gap with real, raw, honest conversation, not held back by the chains of political correctness. You cannot solve a problem you do not understand. Want to understand teenagers today? Listen to this podcast. This podcast is for teens in the U.S. and Canada. To learn more, go to fatimabay.com/podcast or just look for Mindshift Power Podcast on any listening platform. I look forward to you being a faithful listener.